name is Eric Giordano. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. I'm also a political scientist by training. And this is Marlo Embry, Associate Professor of Psychology. This is Jim McCluskey, Associate Professor of Geography. And so the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service is a unit of the UW colleges and UW Extension. And part of what we do is bring together resources to help communities address issues that they need. So WIPS doesn't necessarily have the expertise in all areas, so when we don't, we bring in experts to help us accomplish that. So that's what we've done today. And for this project. I'd also like to really thank you for allowing us to participate and help you gather data for this project. It's been a very interesting project. We've appreciated it, and we also appreciate the fact that you, from everything that Renee has told us, the intent is not to have this study simply be done and sit on a shelf, but we see this as a longer arc of work. And in that sense, I also want to thank Encourage Foundation for their part in this and their support of the survey, and really they are crucial to sort of the next steps of how the survey could actually have some practical value in the communities that were most affected by the mill closure. So we're not going to spend a lot more time introducing ourselves, but if you have questions afterward about WIPS, that's how we call ourselves, or any of us, we'd be happy to answer those when you'd like. My understanding is that you do not have a copy of these slides, but you're certainly welcome to have them if Renee and Allie would like to share those later with you. So we'll go forward. Okay, we'll see if that.
Just jump to plan B here.
We can always help each other.
We've got plan B in place if you want that.
Plan B, right?
Okay.
Low tech. Go ahead.
Well, this doesn't seem to be doing it either, which is really scary.
Do you want to do the forward space button?
I tried that.
Oh, there you go. All right, so let's go ahead and
Okay.
start with a little bit of background. And this may be old news for you, okay? So we'll just go through this kind of quickly. The mill announced its closure in late 2007 and actually closed in 2008. The Federal Workforce Investment Act fund helped to fund the dislocated worker program. Your organization contracted with LETC to deliver services at the mill, and they began on-site services in January. I think there was some kind of an assessment that was done for all workers, and then those who wanted to actually participate in training programs were given the opportunity to sign up to do that. They were assigned a case manager and undertook initially some basic skills training and workshops. By fall of 2008, those enrollees who had decided to participate in training programs had all been signed up for a training program or another, and most of them, or many of them, had finished up that training by December of 2010. However, due to the challenging labor market, most did continue to work with the case managers for another year beyond that, and by June of 2012, nearly all the workers had exited from the training program. So here's some basics about the survey itself, and there's a lot more here in the report if you'd like to take a look at that, but your organization contracted with WIPS to carry out the return on investment study. The survey instrument was tested beforehand, actually with some other workers and from the Brocon mill. We really wanted to get a perspective of how mill workers responded to the survey questions and the idea of the survey, and we got some very valuable feedback from them. A paper copy of the survey was mailed to all of the former Port Edwards Mill employees that were known. And of those 516 surveys, 9 of them were returned address incorrect. And of the rest, the remaining 209 people returned surveys. We also, about halfway, 3/4 of the way through the survey process, sent a reminder postcard to the survey potential respondents asking if they would like to both take the survey and, if they chose, to do an online version of the survey. So 13 of the respondents took us up on the online version. Overall, the response rate was 40.5%, which is very good for this type of a survey. So here are the key findings, and we're going to go over these in a little more detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. First of all, I think generally what I'd like to say is there was some significant return on investment, on your investment in these worker training programs. That's the generally good news. It doesn't mean that all workers came out well, but there were some very positive and maybe even surprisingly positive results of the training programs. So first, dislocated mill workers fared remarkably well, especially given the difficult economic situation both in Wisconsin and nationally, and the prolonged economic situation. And looking at some of the counties in that area in particular, they have experienced what we call chronic unemployment issues, or unemployment over 7%, up to 10% in some of those counties for several years running. Second, workforce training programs were particularly helpful for underskilled mill workers seeking reemployment. So for those who actually were underskilled and desired new skills, this training program was actually very effective for that subgroup. Age also had a very important impact on economic outcomes, and we're going to talk a little more in detail about that. Willingness to commute longer distances to work also improved economic outcomes. And what we mean by this is we don't know that it was a causal effect, but we know there's a relationship. So those who expressed a willingness to commute longer distances to work actually fared better economically after the closure of the mill. Fifth, sector reemployment impacted economic outcomes also of dislocated mill workers, and we'll talk a little more about what that means. And finally, the attitudes of survey respondents remained generally positive despite the changing nature of the transition experience, challenging nature of the transition experience. This is really actually quite significant, and I'm excited to have Marlo present more of that to you, but the optimism level of the workers was remarkably high given the circumstances. So with that, we'll kind of dig in now to some of the other aspects of the survey.
One of the things that we needed to do was delineate where the workers were. So we actually identified what we call a labor shed and then a core area. Now your core area is based on a pretty standard technique where we go through and generate a cumulative curve, in this case using the zip code area employment. And from that, we located 80% of the workers. I think the actual total of the zip code for the core area was 79.7, so it was extremely close. And then the labor shed, right, this is where all the workers came from, right, extending out. And this was 31 contiguous zip code areas. Right? And when we looked at it, we were able to figure out an address match of about 96%, which in terms of GIS is highly exceptional. I mean, normally you're running about 75 to 80%. So what we did is then we generated the maps. And what you're seeing here, this is all of the former Domtar employees. The core area, again, approximates about 15 miles in radius out from the location of the plant, whereas the labor shed is about 50 miles. And one of the things that comes into play here is what we might call distance decay. As you move further from the plant, as you would expect, you would have less employees. But this is, pretty standard. And that 50-mile radius is basically at the outer limit of commuting distance that, that our people took part in. Now, we did a series of demographic comparisons, and if you get into the report, you'll see that this is much, much more substantial. We covered about 20 some odd variables. And we delineated for the core area, the labor shed, and for the state of Wisconsin. Now, we used the Department of Census Community Survey data, and that was the average data from 2010, I do believe. And the reason we use this is a 5-year average, and for looking at stable numbers is considered to be the best data. We could have looked at at 1 year, but then again it's fluctuating. So you're looking at a 5-year average. And one of the things that becomes readily apparent is the median age. The core area has a median age of 43.8 years, which is considerably higher than the state and slightly higher than the labor shed. The other thing, when we looked at median household incomes, you're looking at that it's lower
The
than
following
the labor
participant
shed
has left the conference.
Deb Clemens.
or the state. And then we look at high school graduation rates versus college graduation rates. You know, this is fairly interesting in the sense that for the core area, your high school graduation rates are higher than either the labor shed or for Wisconsin. But when you look at college level, right, you're looking at a lower level than you would have for either Wisconsin or the labor shed in whole. And if we extend this to military service, I believe that you would find something very similar. And that, you know, that goes pretty much with the idea that in the core area there, and in the labor shed in general, you're looking at a very significant manufacturing center. In other words, the number of employees in manufacturing are quite significant. You know, they're going 35%. When you compare that, say, to the state average Wisconsin, which is right about 18% right now, you know, it's quite a significant jump. And I'll turn it over back to Eric.
So I'm not sure about this. I want to ask Renee, did the group get a copy of the survey itself? No.
No.
It's a report, okay. When you get that, page 7 has just a list of a lot of demographic factors that we're just skipping today because you can look at that on your own. So I'm just going to point out a few things. One thing I want to just add on to what Jim said is one of the reasons we wanted to look at that geospatial configuration is because as we started looking at what it means to have an economic effect or a socioeconomic effect on a community, it's really easy to say, well, you know, obviously Port Edwards was directly affected, and Wisconsin Rapids and so forth. But really, if you take a look at that labor shed, you're talking about a community much broader. That 50-mile radius in some ways represents a labor community, if you will, or employment community or workforce community. And so I think we wanted to sort of show you that from a geographic perspective, that we're really talking about a much broader area than simply, you know, the population clusters that we normally think about. So the first big finding that we had is that dislocated workers actually fared reasonably well despite the difficult economy. So among the mill workers aged 62 or younger, actually 90.5% of them found new employment. And we figure that many of them who were older actually opted for retirement. So that explains a little bit about why we didn't even have higher rates. The average new income also was surprising to me, and I don't know if it is to you, it was about 91.1% of previous income, which is actually pretty good, I think. 95.6 respondents reported having health insurance. Obviously, with the Affordable Care Act, things have changed a little bit, but this survey was done in November, December of 2013, before most people had signed up. So most people still had health insurance. Workers also reported having relatively high levels of career satisfaction and overall optimism, which might also be somewhat surprising given the profound changes that many of them had to undertake individually. And finally, the average time to reemployment was about 20 weeks, which is actually consistent with national averages for the time it takes for dislocated workers to find jobs of comparable salaries to the average salaries that they did here. Yes?
Eric, if you would just pop back, I think that when we talked about commissioning this study, one of our concerns was if we were going to do a return on investment, we knew that people who were dislocated from a paper mill like that would not have incomes as high. And so they were making very good salaries with very good benefits. And so that was a risk we took in doing the return on investment study. But I personally was stunned that it was as high as 91% of their previous salary. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think one comment I'd make to that, Renee, is that seems really high to me, the 91%. I mean, that's amazing, because some of those people, that's in a union environment, so they're progressing in wages. Okay, my guess is when they went into a new job location, they started at the bottom. And now we're trying to work their way back too. So at 91 is really, really good.
And it kind of depends. Obviously, some were reemployed in the paper manufacturing industries, and some ended up, maybe you might say, moving laterally to other manufacturing. But you're right, there are a significant number that did start at the bottom, clearly.
I'm gonna suggest we skip the next slide. This kind of flows into what you've been talking about.
Okay. So one of the things we looked at in the study was who was negatively affected. I mean, not everybody obviously had a great outcome. We also aren't going to cover this today, but if you look at the study, you'll find that we looked at also the top 20%, let's say, were positively affected, and the 20% that were most negatively affected, so you can look at the extremes as well. But so here, just generally the negative. So workers experienced income loss were slightly older on average than those who did not. And this really comes into play for those workers at the age of 63. There's suddenly a precipitous drop-off that you'll see when you look at the results. And so there definitely is some issues going on there. We know some of that's due to retirement, but maybe some of that also are other issues that we'll talk about in a minute. 64% of female workers, of the 21 out of 33 that were surveyed, experienced income loss in transitioning to a new job, compared to 51% of reemployed males. So females fared slightly worse than males, and perhaps that's not surprising to some of you. Workers who experienced a loss had spent more years at the mill than those who did not. So the longer time they had in the mill, the less well off they were economically coming out of that experience. Workers who experienced a loss were also, and I mentioned this earlier, measurably less willing to commute than those who did not. So in other words, those who were willing to commute longer distances did better than those who were not. Those who experienced loss spent more weeks without work than those who did not. That's pretty obvious. I think that would be common sense, but that was found. And finally, there was only a slight difference in income among those who reported having a post-high school degree prior to the mill closure compared to those who didn't. So that's kind of interesting too, because it looks like, at least from a high school degree perspective, education wasn't a major factor here in determining the income after reemployment.
One possible flip side to one of the middle bullet points is, people who tend to have more seniority in environments like that also take more with them. So they would be participants in a pension that maybe wouldn't have been offered to somebody who was a newer employee. So while they had, maybe experienced more of a loss in transitioning as far as wages, again, oftentimes we see that they take more with them as well, so that's a benefit.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to begin by talking about the impact of training, and I'm very gratified to see the powerful positive impact of the training programs. A little over a third of displaced workers participated in the training, and in a minute we'll see who chose to participate and who did not. Training had both objective and subjective benefits. Objectively, significantly enhanced the likelihood of finding new employment. That's a pretty sizable difference. And subjectively, as we'll examine in detail in future slides, led to more positive attitudes, optimism, resilience, and so forth. Those who chose to participate in training were more likely to be female, more likely to be younger, more, as we're saying, entrepreneurial, and we'll look at some personality variables that kind of define what it means to be entrepreneurial, but think outside the box, take a chance, take some risk, more educationally oriented, and probably had greater needs to look at supporting and improving their economic situation. Again, some demographic variables that kind of highlight the same point. Those in training tended to be younger, more female, less seniority, lower income, more educated, which probably suggests interested in the idea of education, willing to commute further, and ended up with more positive economic outcomes as well. In terms of subjective variables, had a number of different attitudinal variables, and all of them suggested that training had a significant positive impact.
The following participant has left the conference.
Okay, it happens. Okay. More satisfied with their life overall. More satisfied with their career specifically. More optimistic about life in general. perceived job security. Now, we don't know whether those perceptions were accurate, but perceived that their new career situation was more secure, thought that prospects for advancement were greater, less worrisome, perhaps had less to worry about. Age, as we've seen throughout this report, had a very significant impact. We just see a dramatic difference between younger workers and older workers, and the cutoff point somewhere around this average age level of about 55 years. 100% of those under 42 found new work, and as we'll see, I believe in the next slide, the percentages drop off dramatically with increasing age. So notice, obviously it looks like a lot of individuals 63 or older decided to take early retirement or early Social Security benefits, but even prior to that we start seeing some drop-offs. Even though there looks like a little bit of a bump here, these bars are notably higher than these. So whether this reflects age discrimination in the workplace, which is one hypothesis, or whether it just reflects differing financial needs to pursue new employment, it's hard to say from the survey data, but clearly something is differentiating older and younger workers. Dramatic relationship between age and income. Is that a question by any chance? No. Yeah. 10 minutes? Okay, I'll zip along. Older you are, the worse you do economically in terms of the differential between prior and post income, although not incorporating things like the pensions and so forth. Willingness to commute makes a big difference, and this kind of ties into what you did as well. Again, the average survey respondent was willing to travel about 3/4 of an hour. For those who are reemployed, the further you're willing to commute, the higher your income is, which the next slide I think presents graphically. I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit. These don't look like huge trends, but there's a big difference between $44,000 and $53,000. Right, $8,000 is not trivial. The further you're willing to commute, the better off your economic prospects. So this trade-off between time and money. Presumably people who are not willing to commute didn't want to sacrifice lifestyle issues and how much time it takes to commute and paid a financial price for that. So I think it's kind of interesting to see the trade-off decisions people had to make between time and money. We looked at different work sectors. About slightly less than 60% of individuals found work somewhere within manufacturing. The remaining 40% found work outside of manufacturing. So how much you had to think outside of the box, how creatively you had to consider reinventing yourself, and clearly training would have a significant role in helping individuals to reinvent themselves for a career change.
Yeah, just one thing to add. Obviously, the most different your career, your reemployment was, the career manufacturing or sectors rather that your employment was in, the more training you would need, and so that was reflected also in the results.
Again, income by sector. Not surprisingly, those who found new employment within the same industry could best leverage their pre-existing experience, and so ended up having higher new incomes. The more of a change you had to make, the more you're kind of starting over and expecting at least some short-term income erosion, as this graph clearly shows. I want to respect your time, so I'm going quickly here. Similarly with how long it took to find a new job. Now what this doesn't factor in is the time it takes to be trained. And obviously those who are making a career change are more likely to need retraining, which takes time. Right? So you have to factor that in. But also the fact that maybe your search is actually longer just because you're having to convince a new employer that even though you're making a transition, you are a valuable employee in the new sector. Worker attitudes, and since I'm a social psychologist, this was particularly of interest to me. Who's most optimistic? Youth. This was disappointing to me at 59, but apparently younger people are more optimistic. I found that a real bummer, frankly. Right? However, if you're old enough to retire, you're also optimistic. Right? The people who are not optimistic are those who wish they would retire, but they can't, all right? People in my economic sector, all right, age sector rather. But optimism in general is quite high. And I was really impressed that even given the bumps in the road that these people experience, they remain very resilient and optimistic overall, which I think says a lot about the ethos of people in central Wisconsin. Right? We're fighters. We know how to persist. Right? Even if PowerPoint presentations take longer than advertised, you still remain resilient, and thank you for that. Okay. So I'll turn it back to Eric in terms of future direction.
So we kind of asked this question, and these are not all the answers. You know, what is it that we need to further investigate?
The following participant has left the conference.
Patty Nolan.
So, for example, one of the things that we really talked a lot about, and I hope that it's something that you will talk about going forward, is whether and how different modalities of training actually impact workers of different types, whether it's because of their gender, their personality type, their age. There's a lot of research that suggests that people have very different learning styles, and so we wonder, we don't know, as from the results of the survey, how changes in some training techniques and modalities might actually be more able to be received by older versus younger and other different types of workers. Also, the extent to which workers receive or don't receive training and believe that they made the right choice. That's just an interesting thing that we've been talking about, and one of the things is the arc of work that we want to see going forward, and I'll turn to Jenny and Gus from the Encourage Foundation if they have anything to add here. We really want to get more in depth on some of the specific stories that the workers have experienced on a personal level. This was something we couldn't glean from the survey. We did have a little section in the survey that was kind of like a open-ended response, and we did get some responses. But these are some of the questions, these last couple, that we're very interested in. And we've heard a few workers say things like this, or Jenny and Gus have, things like, gosh, if I'd only known now, or then what I know now about the possibilities of training, I would have taken advantage of that. And they didn't. And so one of the questions is, how can we reach those workers? And what can we do in the future to help workers in other places that face these dislocations to convince them that training actually will be helpful? And so that's something that we need to think about and also investigate, which we plan to do. And
You want to?
yeah, I just wanted to talk this next one. And so what lessons do the workers learn and do the community learn from this experience? And one of the things for next steps that we have going forward is to actually have I guess we call it a community event that's going to focus on the workers. So we're going to invite all the workers who participated, and even those who didn't in the survey, to come to an event in Wisconsin Rapids or in the area, along with community members and community leaders, and really ask some of these questions. What are some of the lessons that we learned? What lessons did we learn that we think other communities should know about that are dealing with these issues? What do we wish that we had known then that we know now that we can pass on? So this is really, I think, exciting to me because it shows me that there's some desire to take some of the results that we've learned here and keep learning and improving what you all are doing. So that's part of what the event that we're going to hold coming up. But we haven't set a date yet, but we're looking probably at the end of August to hold this event. And of course, the Encourage Foundation is really helping to organize this. We'll be there also doing some story collection. We'll probably have it in a World Cafe format so that there's a lot of data collection and collection of ideas and stories from the workers themselves. And we'll be coming out actually with a second sort of companion report that's much shorter, less academic, a little bit more of a community interest story. So here's what we really are hearing from the workers themselves and how it relates to the data that we just presented here today. So I think I'd just like to go to the last slide, just to make sure that this is on the screen. So we really want to thank all of the people who helped with the survey. Allie and Renee were fabulous to work with, as were Jenny, Gus, Rick, and Corey from Encourage Foundation, and so we're grateful for that. Now, we're happy to answer any questions, or if we need to move on, we can do that too, so, yeah.
I have just a brief comment and then a question to follow. I worked at the paper mill in Tomahawk for PCA, And when roll call went down, PCA hired a number of the roll call employees. And after a period of time, we found that they left to get back so they didn't have to travel. You know, and we were within 45 minutes of roll call. I wonder, did you get any indication, did the survey indicate any of that happening with the Domtar people? Even though, because I was kind of fascinated about the commuting, the willingness to commute. Did they commute, and then as soon as they could find something back in their, 15 minutes from their house, they moved back? Did any indication of that?
We only ask it as a one-shot, unfortunately. I'm really interested in that question too. Be a nice follow-up. I'm guessing there was some of that, but I don't have the data.
Obviously, more than you think, because when you sit down and figure it out, you lose, if you're going 45 miles, I used to work away from home. When you figure your fuel alone at $4 a gallon a day, if you're getting 25 miles at a gallon, you're looking at $5,000 a year in fuel. So if you're making $10,000 more, now you're down to $5,000, plus the wear and tear in your vehicle, plus the 2 hours a day. People figure that out pretty soon, that they're not gaining anything by going a further distance. You're better by staying closer and taking a little less.
So I think that's a great issue. I too wish that we had maybe had some of that in the survey. We didn't. However, that's something we can follow up on with the some of the workers.
That's a very good question. I work with the trucking industry. We have a lot of people, they're dislocated. They'll take training to get a, become a truck driver or a diesel mechanic, other things too. They'll take employment, but once they get in about a year.
The following participant has left the conference.
Find that local job closer to home
Carol
more often,
Ulrich.
and with family, they'll take that local job that pays far less so that they can be within 15 minutes of home.
Yeah, and I think, this is our psychologist, so I'll turn to him for this, but also I think speaks to not only just the economic costs, but there's a lot of personal and social costs to upheaval, and actually having to relocate somewhere, and people don't want to do that. I think that's something that we frequently see.
Sure, and I think, that's exactly why we were so thrilled that Renee came to us and asked to partner on this, and why we chose to invest in this study, is that we always saw that this was like the first step, but then how do we really localize that and have conversations in the community with people that were impacted by it, and get to some of the assumptions we're increasingly hearing about, which is people want to be more local all the time. And then the transitions they're making to accommodate that for their families. We hear that anecdotally increasingly over the years, and so we see these next steps is to take what we've learned from this study, have a broad conversation with workers impacted by this, and then think about what those lessons learned and from a tangible standpoint to the community can come out of that. So we're looking forward to the next steps for sure.
One thing to point out when you're talking about, the cost of commuting, et cetera, this report is a shot, if you would, a baseline in time. So this is looking at 2013, early 2014 data. So if you're talking about people taking losses due to commuting, they've already done it, and they are where they are now. So I'm not saying that it's a moot point, but they've already made the decisions based on where they are. And this is, 5 years after the plant closure. So I think that's something also to consider. It's not that they are all of a sudden going to be changing their minds. If they had changed their minds, they probably would have done it way before this.
I just wanted to also introduce Gus Mancuso, who's my colleague at Encourage, and he is going to be key in shaping the next steps on this. But Gus was actually the principal of Fort Edwards High School when the mill closed. And I just wanted to give him a quick minute to give some reflection on that, because I think this conversation is relevant.
Yeah, having lived the 4 years and seeing the families that struggled and obviously seeing the impact of it, we are very interested in finding out how we can take this experience through the data that we have, bringing these people together and talking about extending those relationships that the community has with each other, and how we can apply those lessons, as Eric said, to future situations that come about. There's been some terms here, the question that we want to really do a deeper dive on is, what allows for that resiliency? What allows for that hope? what allows for people to survive these kinds of things. And what we're really going to try to do in this next round is really, for the lack of a better way to describe it, honor those people and honor their voice, because they're really the experts in this whole process, and they can tell us how other groups can survive this in a better way as well. So as Eric mentioned, we're going to do a World Cafe, and we're going to be talking about it, and we're going to be trying to have a healing process as well, because there still obviously is some residual effects associated with any closing, and we're going to try to use that as a healing process and take it a step forward, as everybody's been saying here, on applying the lessons learned here to future situations, because I think that's what everybody in this room would want to happen as well. Because the realist in all of us knows that there are going to be adjustments in the future for other communities as well, and we need to help those communities, and these people could serve as literally mentors for future situations.
Wait a comment.
Yeah, I represent the Wood County Board, and this report, of course, has particular interest to me and to our board members, and I'd really like to see this presented to the Wood County Board at some time. I think they would be interested in seeing this. The important thing, I think there are some really good public policy lessons to be learned here about what we need to be doing as sort of a preventative measure in case we face another one of those huge layoffs in the future, which we could. Those things could happen very, very quickly. And we see already, I live in the Marshall portion of Wood County, and we see the effect of those things starting, of the recession and the layoffs, the massive layoffs, starting to show up in different ways in our city and our county right now. We just finished a huge housing survey, and we found out that, shockingly, what the younger kids, the kids who are the kids of the people who are laid off, the lesson they learned from this is don't buy a house, because you may have to move for a job. We're having an explosion of apartment complex construction in Marshall this year because of that pent-up supply. So what we've got to do, what happens for workforce development, we have to make sure we see some of the thresholds that made it easier for them to find jobs. And I think the public policy is that's where we've got to put our money, is preparing them in case of disaster, sort of drown-proofing them, if you will. But I would like to see this report, a copy of this report. I think it is great. Thank you.
We will be, Eric and the group is gonna meet after the board meeting. We will be finalizing it and sending it out a copy to every board member. And it is our intent, we'll start with the executive committee, to go through it in terms of identifying some public policy initiatives that we might use moving forward, lessons learned, and how we might change things.
I think the report also highlighted another area that really wasn't the focus of the report, but the importance of education. That in the results there, we could see that the people that had more education down the road fared better than the ones that had less. And somehow, through initiatives, how do you continue to communicate the value of ongoing education, whatever it might be, not just in the event of a bad event like this, but just for growth and development, but it has positive impacts if something like this were to happen down the road.
And I love the word you chose. You said ongoing, because that was actually one of the factors as well. Not just what they had, but what they were willing to have, to continue. And those who were willing to get more actually fared better. So you're right.
Kind of building on that, we spend a lot of money, this board spends a lot of money on the training aspect, so I'd be interested in, how much money did we spend, in what areas of study did they go into? Is that the area of study that matches the job, or did they go into nursing and then go back into manufacturing? And then if they did that, did they stay there, or is there a period of time and then they actually went into a new career? Do we know anything about that, so then we could help direct people better and direct their dollars better? There's a lot of questions about the training piece.
We can answer half of that from our data. Renee?
We do have, we didn't ask those things specifically on the survey, but obviously, through Cindy, we have access to those case files and we know who they are, so we could do that.
Really interesting, I
Yeah.
think, to look at that relationship.
One of the things that I found real interesting is you're starting to peel away part of an onion that really delineates the importance of the labor shed. And it's gonna be a challenge, not only in central Wisconsin, but the state in terms of our boomer retirements, and we're not replacing our demographics. And so we're gonna have a much greater demand on people willing to travel. And I think we as a region, this is an opportunity to explore that more readily to different industry sectors. Because we are going to have an economy that's robust enough to pull people from greater distances. And the better we understand that, the infrastructure and the programs to be put in place for that.
Okay,
Okay, thanks so
very
much.
good, thank
Appreciate
you
your
very
time.
much,
Thank
very
you.
well done. And special thanks to everybody that contributed to the survey and helped us. I think it gives us a lot of information to go on and to work with.